for this week's office hours. We have a number of announcements that we're going to dive into from our development team. But before that, I have a couple of reminders and just links from my end as well. So I just want to remind everyone of our format. We have this weekly office hours for those who are based in US and EMEA from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time every week. And so we appreciate you joining this instance. And we have this as a reoccurring series if you do have further questions. We also have a monthly session as well for customers based in APAC on the second Wednesday of each month from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time as well. So if you have colleagues in other time zones, feel free to let them know we have different office hours. On top of that, in the interim between any of our office hours, we do have GitHub discussions that we go through and triage daily as a team. And so if you do have anything that comes up, feel free to use that mechanism as well. A couple of announcements from my end. I wanted to make everyone aware that we have a new release of Python 1.9.0. There are some new AI connector abstract methods that have been added in, and there's Mistral AI function calling and also parallel function calling as well. There's some other enhancements and some bug fixes as well, and so we recommend that if you're using Python, you go ahead and check out that latest release. And then we also had mentioned last time, but just want to reiterate to everyone, we do have our new release for .NET for 1.19.0. And so there are a number of changes and some of our ads for Onyx demos and concepts and other things as well. And so if you haven't had a chance to take a look, we would recommend going through for both of these releases that have come out. In our documentation, there's a lot of updates that you'll be seeing, and the last week we've been going through and adding a lot of sections around our telemetry work, some of our function calling, other items. Some of the development team is on, and we'll dive into that a bit more in detail, but just wanted to make everyone aware if you haven't had a chance to go through and check out some of our latest documentation, there are some updates that are coming as well. And then, as always, for our roadmap, if you are curious to see what we're working on or what's staged for later on, we do have our backlog by bucket to be able to go through and see for each of these different areas as well. I'll put all these links in chat as well if you do want to go in a bit more depth and be able to dive into that. And then this kind of leads into some of our updates that we have as well. There are a number of new blog posts and new articles that we have published out. We have a blog that is in Spanish. There's an entire video that community members created. So we want to make sure that if you do have customers or individuals who speak Spanish, we do have content out as well. The new blog design has added a link section. And so we're going through and populating. We have links to some of our samples, our documentation, other items as well here. And then there are two other new blogs as well that I'll turn over to our developers to dive into a bit more around telemetry and function calling as well. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and first turn it over to Roger to present out some of the new updates. Roger, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Sophia. Thank you, everyone, for joining. So pretty much the changes here is more related to the latest releases from OpenAI SDK, in which they kind of broke what was breaking chains regarding how they treat the endpoint that is passed to the SDK. And these end up leading us also to make those changes on our side. And one of those is was updated in our documentation, in which in our connector for the first version where there was no OpenAI SDK, we were initially kind of forgiving when the chat completions was added to your endpoint. Now, as one of those changes, we are just going to provide to the SDK literally what you provided as an endpoint. So no interference from our abstractions regarding what is the endpoint that is provided. So before, if you pass down /chat completions, that would be fine. But today, if you pass that, it eventually inside of the connector, the connector will append that on top of your endpoint. So the changes here is always asking you to provide the endpoint, knowing that the OpenAI SDK will always append chat/completions to the final endpoint. So if you had that before, you had to remove that as well. Another thing that the second point here is that before, if you didn't provide any path and query to your endpoint, now we are not going to add a D1 to that endpoint as well. So if we provide a base address, basically, we are going to just forward that base address to the OpenAI SDK, and the OpenAI SDK will just add chat completions as a result of your endpoint. With this, we kind of move away from trying to change the endpoint, and your experience will be kind of literally what you're just providing to the connector for those very specific and narrow scenarios. So this was just an update to the documentation, and also to make we even more customizable regarding the endpoints. That's pretty much it. Thank you, Sophia, for your time. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Perfect. I'm not seeing anything in chat, but if you do have any questions, Roger will be on and we'd love to dive into that. Next, I want to turn it over to Tal around some of the telemetry work. Tal, let me know too if you want to share a screen at all.
Yes, let me share my screen. Sure.
Okay, perfect. I'll
Sorry,
stop
I was
sharing.
muted. Yep. 1 second. Yeah, so we have added telemetry or observability to Semantic Kernel. So many of you have asked similar questions. For example, how do I obtain the render prompt that SK sends to the AI model? Or how do I monitor the token usage of my application? Or how do I gain insights into SK's internal operation during runtime? And so on. So these are all excellent questions, and they fundamentally all belong to the same class of questions. How do I observe semantic kernel and ultimately my application? So we are introducing observability in SK Python. This feature has been actually around for a while in SK.NET, but we haven't released any documents for it. Well, we have documents in the GitHub repository, but we just didn't have any in the Learn site. My bad on that. But this time around, the feature is released along with the Learn site documents. The Learn site documents contain end-to-end sample codes, both in C# and Python, to help you get started. And now I'm going to go over a short demo with one of the Learn site samples. And I'm going to use Python and Aspire dashboard for today's demo. For more information, please head over to the Learn site. So this is the sample I'm going to use. It has the setup steps and the code, the entire code, and explanation of the code, and how you could set up Aspire dashboard, and how you would inspect data once you run the code. So I'm going to run the code now. Let me just go over the code actually. So I'm simulating in this Python script. I'm simulating a conference room booking system, and I'm asking the AI to reserve a conference room for me. So when I run the script, what you would see is just the response from the AI. But in production, you want to see, whoa, how did the AI arrive at that answer, right? So see here. So I've booked the room 101 for you today. Because it's complicated, right? Think about what the AI needs to do. It needs to find out which room is available, and then it needs to actually invoke the tool to make the reservation, and then actually return a natural language response to you. So this is something called auto function calling. That's one of the features in semantic kernel. But if you want to see it in action, you need to rely on telemetry. So I have run that script, and now I have to head over to Aspire dashboard. And you'll see here a new trace has been created right here. And then if I click on view, you will see all the steps that semantic kernel took to arrive at that answer. Right? So first, it asked the model, right? I want to reserve a room. And then the model was smart enough to request a function call. And then the SK will automatically execute a function, right? Return a list of available rooms to the model. And then it passes that answer back to the model, and then the model finds one of the rooms and then make a reservation. And then this returns, and then the model gets the confirmation and then returns the answer back to the user. So if you click in one of them, you'll see the token usage used in this completion, right? The tool call complete, the function calling completion and the prompt. And then you will see the endpoint, right? Where the model is. And the finish reason, right? Response ID, and I think most importantly, the prompt and completion. And then if you head over to the kernel function that's executed, you will see the name of the function. You will see, you will see the time it took for the function to run. It took 1 second because in the sample code, I was simulating a remote call to a service or something. Actually, in the script, so I was simulating a remote call, so I had it sleep for 1 second. So in here, you will see that, and the second call to the model took a bit shorter. Same for the third. So it actually makes, so when you run this script, it looks like it makes one call to the model, but it actually sends 3 requests to the model. So this would be extremely useful in production environment where you want to see what's going on in your application. And then if you go to structure, this is essentially the log that's generated from semantic kernel, and then all of them will get sent to your telemetry backend or monitoring solution. And then you will see sometimes the function argument. You will see here calling the book room function with argument room 101 and stuff like that. So I believe this will be extremely useful for developers. And yeah, and I think finally, SK is continuously improving, so we welcome any feedback. Yeah, getting back to you, Sophia.
Perfect, Tal. Thank you so much for sharing that and walking through the demo as well. I'm not seeing any questions in chat, but if anyone does want to add anything in chat or come off of mute, we'd love to hear from you. Great. Well, if there are no questions, we'll move on to the next topic, but feel free to put any questions you have in chat or leave it for open Q&A as well. Sergey, over to you for some of the function calling work as well. Do you want to go and share screen as well?
Sure. Yep. I'm
Okay.
sharing. So let me zoom a little bit so that it's visible. So I'm happy to announce that, like, literally, when was it? Yesterday, we've released a new function calling model. That's in addition to existing function calling model, which Semantic Kernel already has. But the new function calling model has a few benefits that I'm going to go through in a short while. And I'm going also just to lead you through the main concepts of the new function model. So if you look at the code snippet, and if you're familiar with function calling in Semantic Kernel, you probably won't notice any difference. The only difference is this assignment. So we introduce a new property to the prompt execution settings, and with the name function choice behavior, which you can assign to either of the 3 values, auto, required, and no. Apart from that, the code is pretty same comparing to the current function calling model Semantic Kernel has. So one of the main benefit of the new function calling model is that it abstracted away, so that like now it lives in the abstractions package, which means that all the connectors in Semantic Kernel, all AI connectors in Semantic Kernel can use the same function calling primitives or classes in order to enable function calling model for a connector itself, rather than having a separate set of the similar function calling classes, but which differ by slight changes specific to particular AI connector. And that open a bunch of like possibilities. For example, you can once create and configure function calling configuration, and you can reuse that function calling configuration for different connectors. For example, if today you're working with OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, and for some reason you want to switch to another model, right? So you don't need to update your function calling configuration because the other connectors will easily understand that function calling model. So what you will do, you will change only one line at the top here. So instead of registering at OpenAI chat completion, you will register, I don't know, at Mistral chat completion or at Gemini chat completion or any other one. And the rest of the code will work for you seamlessly. So another aspect is that while developing the new function calling model, we've thought about the extensibilities, because sooner or later there will be some differences between the AI models, and we need a way to handle or deal with those differences. And for this reason, we introduced the options parameter, so which can be passed to any function choice behavior we have today. It's an optional parameter, but if you use a specific connector, and if that connector has a specific settings, so there will be special options for that particular connector, so that you can enable that option. Also, that options class will have some settings that are like applicable to all connectors. For example, soon we are going to implement parallel function calling and parallel function invocation. And those two settings are going to live in that options setting. And the last thing about new function calling model now, it's supported from the prompt template configuration. So for example, you can write your prompt template, what the weather in Boston, and you can specify that, well, in order to answer the question, you would like to have function choice behavior of type auto, which means that all the functions registered on the kernel, or all the functions of all plugins registered on the kernel will be advertised to LLM to answer that prompt from this prompt template config. So that ensures that overview. Next, I'm going to briefly guide you through the new API. So we're introducing as I said, three function choice behaviors. Auto function choice behavior. When you're configuring auto function choice behavior, you're basically telling a model just, hey, model, you are responsible. You're the one who is deciding whether to call functions or not. And if you're about to call a function, again, it's up to you to decide which one to call. So it may allow a model to call the functions, or model may decide not to call any function because, well, it thinks that, like, well, in order to complete that certain prompt, no function call is required. The other function choice behavior introduced is the required. This one is basically forcing the model always to call provided functions. So model is not in the position to decide whether to call it or not. If it was told to call it, it's supposed to call it. And the last function choice behavior is the non one. So this one is not present in the current function calling model, but it's a new one. It's basically when you configure this, when you're specifying the non-function choice behavior. So what happens behind this? All the functions from all the kernel plugins are advertised to or provided to AI model, and model see that, like, you don't want to call any function. And in this case, you can craft a prompt something like, hey, tell me what functions you would call if you need to answer this question. And model will answer you. So model will look at the functions you provided to it, and model will say, hey, just like in order to complete this prompt, I need to call these functions with this argument. So basically, this non-function child behavior is very useful for dry runs when you want to see which functions model will call before actually calling them. So yeah, let me again lead you through terminology. So function advertisement, probably you've heard I mentioned a few times. It's basically the same as providing functions to AI model. So Semantic Kernel do a bunch of things behind the scenes for you in order to simplify your life as developers. And one of this is function advertisement. So function advertisement is a process when all the functions you've registered on the kernel or all the functions you want to give a model are sent to the AI model for you. So, and apart from the functions, well, functions as a bodies, they are not to send to the AI model, but like functions metadata describing the name of the functions, number of parameters, name of each parameter, like type of each parameter, return type, and schema of return type. All that information is sent to the AI model, and that's what we call function advertising. Current model supports two ways how you can advertise a function. So you can advertise it automatically. So all the functions registered on in all the functions from all plugins registered on the kernel will be advertised for you automatically. Or you can specify a subset of functions you want to advertise. In this case, if you have the instances of the function, for example, in this example, I have two instances, like get weather for city and get current time. And like I'm explicitly specifying them as an array and passing as an argument for function parameter. In this case, only two functions are going to be advertised to the AI model. Scrolling down, yes, I already described the using auto function choice behavior. So it's the behavior that allows the model to decide whether to call the functions and which functions to call. A little bit below, you can see that how the same thing may be configured in the prompt template config. Required, yes, it's the one that like forces the model to call advertised functions. Similarly, it can be configured in the YAML template. And the last one is the known one. It's basically the one which is very useful for dry runs. So what you need to do is you need to say, hey, just like I would like to use non-function choice behavior. And you can ask, specify which provided functions are needed to determine the color of the sky in the Boston at a specific date. And it answering basically saying, hey, in order to do that, I need first to call daytime utils get current time, get current UTC daytime. And then it says that like I need to call get weather for city. So it may be useful for some scenarios in case before the calling actual functions, users want to see what model are going to do with provided functions. Yes, there is another aspect. So it's like a little bit of terminology again. So function invocation. So if you look at the function calling in general, right? So there are like a few moving parts here. So one is function advertisement. It's when Semantic Kernel present list of the functions to the AI model to choose or to select from. The other part is when AI model decided, oh, well, I would like to, I'm choosing the function 1 and 2, and it's sending these functions to us. We call it function calling. So it's basically process of notifying Semantic Kernel that AI wants to call a function. And the last step in this sequence of events is just function invocation. It's the terminology is very similar to function calling, but it's a difference in terms of that function invocation is performed by Semantic Kernel, and function invocation is actual invocation or execution of a function requested by a model or chosen by a model. So if you click on this article, new function calling model supports the same two modes, which are very similar, which are exactly the same as the current function model. So it's auto function invocation. So auto function invocation, basically it's the mode which is turned on by default. And if you don't want to control how functions are invoked, by Semantic Kernel, you don't need to specify anything. Everything will be done for you out of the box, end to end. So create an instance of a kernel, register a service, AI service, register a bunch of plugins, craft a prompt, enable auto function invocation. Everything is going to be done out of the box for you. But for certain scenarios, if you want a specific function invocation process, you can activate a manual function invocation. In this case, what you need to do is to, while assigning function choice behavior, let me scroll to the right a little bit. You need to say auto invoke false. In this case, Semantic Kernel is not going to invoke function automatically. As soon as AI model notifies Semantic Kernel that, hey, Semantic Kernel, I would like you to call a few functions, all that information will be passed to you as a caller of this API, and it will be up to you how to call the function, how to invoke the function. But of course, Semantic Kernel provides you a bunch of tools simplifying that process. For example, this line sending the prompt to AI model, then we are checking whether AI model replied with a meaningful text. And if it's not, most likely it's a function call. And then in order to get the function call information, we have this additional static methods on the function call content class, where you're putting a result, and out of the result, you're getting a list of the function calls AI model chosen for invocation. And if there are no functions, we are exiting. But if there are function calls, what you can do, you can iterate over each of the function call, and then you can invoke the function itself again. So this invoke async and nice syntaxes sugar are registered on the function call class. And as soon as you have results, again, so you can easily transform it back to the chat message and put it back to the chat history, so that the chat history will be sent to AI model again, and the AI model will say, oh, well, yes, I requested function 1, and here are the results from function 1. And then the AI model will be able to reason about the function. Yep, I believe that's it. One small thing is that we also have a migration guide allowing you to switch from the current existing model to a new one. So you can find it in getting support and yes, function calling migration. So that's guide has a bunch of samples that if you're already using function calling, that you will recognize, and it will be very easy for you to switch from one function calling model to another one. For example, that's the current function model looks like, and this is a new function calling model. Yep, and at the end, again, if you're using already function calling model, and if you're using manual function invocation mode, so here is an example how you can switch your manual function invocation code from the current model to the new one. Or you may even just rethink whether you need manual function invocation code in your place, because in most of the cases you don't need that unless you have a special requirements for doing that. So I believe that's it. Thank you. And Sophia, back to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Larry, for walking through all that. We have a couple of questions in chat. Rick, do you want to come off of mute for the question you have about some of your customers and what their ask is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is a question in a conversation I've had with Chris several times, and this is basically regarding a capability that would allow you to flag or toggle the advertisement of individual functions within a plugin. So for example, you may have a plugin that has 15, 20 functions, and somehow you want to dynamically enable or disable the auto invocation capabilities for those functions. And you want to be able to do that in a one-off manner. Instead of having, say, or advertising 15 functions for this one call, you may only want to advertise 2 of those functions for that given plugin. Is that is that something that you guys are considering or thinking about? And I tell you why I bring it up. had a customer that raised a concern over having, lots of plugins, like 20, 30, 40, 50 plugins, and how large and how much of an increase that would result in token wise, for the tools and the functions that are added to the prompt. They were raising concerns over that, and I was trying to think of a way to address that. Right, you could do it programmatically by dynamically adding and choosing which plugins are loaded in the plugin collection, but you still would not be able to reduce the number of functions that are exposed for one given plugin. I was just curious if that's something that folks have brought up in the past, or if that's something that would be of value.
Yep, those concerns make sense. The less functions you advertise, the more precise answer you will get, and it's the less space for AI to make mistakes. And again, so you can save on the number of tokens which are sent back and forth. Question. Well, as far as I understand, that's you want to exclude the certain functions dynamically, right, or statically? You want to exclude them statically.
Well, doesn't necessarily have to be statically.
Mm-hmm.
If there's just a way to enable or disable the function being exposed to the LLM, would be all that's needed.
Yeah. So there is a static way. So for example, if you have a plugin with 50 functions, right, and you know that this plugin is for only one scenario, so the simple thing you can do is to remove the kernel function attribute from those methods. So for example, you can go and remove 40 attributes from 40 methods. In this case, only 10 functions with 10 attributes will be advertised. But again, so I'm not sure that is applicable to a scenario, but that's a simple thing you can do.
In this case, they need to be able to do it dynamically at runtime. Would be the preferred way.
So to do it dynamically, so at the moment you will need to write a custom code that would, based on the context, I don't know whether based on the chat history or based on certain flag or certain condition, can go and advertise certain functions. For example, you may create an instance of 10 functions, and for example, if certain condition is true, you may advertise first 5, and if the other condition is true, you can advertise the other 5. Again, so it's possible today. The only thing is you will need to write some code. We're also talking about the filters that may resolve your scenarios, but we don't have them yet, but we are talking about them. That thing will allow you dynamically, it will be basic. It's kind of like a hook, which is called every time functions are going to be advertised to LLM. And that hook will have all the list that are going to be advertised. And what you can do inside that hook, you can say, hey, just I don't want to advertise those 40 functions. I only want to advertise those first 10, for example. And that hook will allow you to do that. But we don't have that functionality yet, but we think about adding it. That should.
So if I could just paraphrase that for a second. Sergey, I think what I'm hearing you saying is that instead of the functions being exposed off of a plugin, you would have let's just say you have a collection of functions that you dynamically, have access to, and those functions would be dynamically added to the kernel. Is that what you're suggesting? Instead of this being a function exposed off of a plugin, you just have code that would dynamically register each of the functions in question that you want to allow to be invoked?
That's maybe one of the solutions, but that's not what I'm referring to.
Okay.
So the thing I'm referring to is something that is going to call dynamically. Think about it as a function that as a parameter has a list of the functions to send to LLM.
Gotcha.
And that list is all the functions registered on the kernel. And you are in a position to iterate over the list, identify functions you want to advertise, and return only those functions you want to advertise to LLM. And only those functions will be advertised. The rest are not going to be advertised. It's kind of like a filter that is going to be called every time the functions are going to send or advertise to LLM. It's a dynamic way of doing things rather than static.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I'll have to think through this a little bit more, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rick. There was another response to in chat from Evan around some of the filters. As you're thinking through it, feel free to reach out in GitHub discussions or office hours as well. We'd love to hear as you're thinking through it. There was another question in chat that I see there was a good response to, but just wanted to make sure, Gary, there's no follow-ups for either of your questions. If you want to come off of mute, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I understand that the function calling is turned off by default. Just out of curiosity, why is that? If the
no. It's not turned on by default. It's turned off. It's disabled. So it's not going to work. And
sorry, I meant to say it's turned off by default. So,
okay, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm curious as to why that is. But the other thing is irrespective of that. So I'm trying to get the the agent group chat to work. So I've got an agent selecting another agent, which is good. And I've got some more questions on that. But now I've got the agent activated and it has a plugin, but the plugins aren't getting executed because they're turned off by default. So I see a lot of examples on how to enable plugins when you're doing a chat completion, because you pass that in as part of the execute. But we don't do that with regards to the agents, right? Because it's kind of more behind the scenes. So how do we turn it on for the group chat is what I'm trying to work out.
Yeah, so I provided some information in chat. Thanks for the question, Gary. And I'll link some agent examples while we're talking. But effectively, each agent can have different plugins defined. According to their role, different agents have and so they'll be tooled according to that role. And so there's not the concept of defining plugins at the group chat level. It's going to be eventized with each agent. Yeah, and then so with the OpenAI Assistant agent. Is right now always automatic function calling, but if you're using a chat completion agent, you still need to set, you need to explicitly, just like with normal chat completion, enable automatic function calling, and otherwise it's off by default. And here I'll link. So here's an example right on the line number where you can see that occurring. Just a second.
So is that on the chat invoke? Maybe I didn't check that.
No, it's when you're defining the agent.
Okay.
So
defining is good.
And yeah, within kernel arguments. Kernel arguments includes the prompt execution settings, and so you can include that when you're defining the agent by assigning it an arguments. Even if you don't have arguments, you can have empty arguments with the prompt execution settings and the function choice.
Oh, okay. I see.
To auto. Yeah.
All right. That's okay. So all I need to do is set up my agents with that. So that's easy, and then everything should theoretically start working again. Yeah, that's good.
Yep. Cool.
All right. So just some other feedback that I had, because I've just started working with this over the last few days for a hackathon. The selection strategies, I just took me a while to work out that they existed. So that was a bit frustrating. But once I did, then I got to the point where the two that you have are a bit limiting, right? Because I guess you guys are just starting to get that out. Is there any plans to create what I would call, say, a free flow strategy? So it acts like a normal chat. So the user asks the question, there's a bunch of agents in there, and then we pick the appropriate agent for the question. In other words, very much similar to how an agent would pick its plugin using function calling in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, the kernel prompt function strategy could potentially be able to semantically evaluate the user intent or even agent-to-agent intent, although and thanks for the note on the discoverability aspect for the strategies. But I think to your point, I mean, I think at a certain scale, it becomes kind of cumbersome to have a single kernel prompt managing. I mean, if you have like 2 or 3 agents, if you go beyond that, I think it can be a little challenging to properly define the behavior. We are currently working on a framework that I'm actually not at the liberty to kind of fully discuss at this point in time, but we're targeting Ignite timeframe, and it will provide a more powerful pattern for orchestrating agent relationships. Kind of, you could imagine it as kind of being able to define a conditional agent graph potentially.
Yeah, in the meantime, Gary, the way to get around this is I've had like 10 agents in a chat, and if you define their roles of exactly what they do, you should be able to get the right agent to speak up. But that's all prompting. So you need to tell them, you're the PM agents, you only answer questions about whatever project plans, right? You're the designer agent, you'll only answer questions that come up about design patterns. If you do that, you should be able to get the right agent to look at the chat, say, oh, that's me, and then either respond and call functions.
And you're using the kernel function strategy, selection strategy for that, right?
You literally don't have to. Like, you can just do that in the system prompt and the meta prompt for each agent and tell it why it exists.
Okay, so I get that, but then if you and I kind of had that. So if you have that in your 3 or 4 agents, that data isn't sent to the LLM. So then I'm trying to work out. So if you've got those 3 and a prompt comes in that says, analyze my XLS, right? And then we want an agent that knows how to do that, but then we need to ask for the file, right, etc. How are you getting it to? I'm not clear in that particular scenario how you chose that particular agent.
You don't need to. So they're all listening to the same thread if you're using OpenAI, right? So they can all listen into the thread and say, oh, that's me. It's time for me to go. Does that make sense?
No, that's. I'm not sure how we're activating a specific agent in that particular scenario.
Yeah. I'm actually curious to dig into this scenario. I wonder if, Evan, we can follow up and expose this in a sample. I think the community could benefit from your pattern here.
Yep, that's good. Yeah, we can do that.
I mean, it sounds good. I'd like to explore that because I'd like to get something today because I've got like a day or two for the hackathon that I'm working on, right?
Yes.
But some other feedback I have is that so I tried to create a custom quotes free flow strategy based off the kernel functions selection strategy, but I ran into some problems because the the select agent async is marked sealed and protected. So why? Because that was painful. Because now what I wanted to do is I wanted to use some encapsulation composition, and because what I wanted to do is craft a custom prompt dynamically and then feed it into all the work that you've done with the kernel function strategy, selection strategy. But I couldn't do it because I couldn't use it in any composition, and then inheritance wouldn't work either because it was sealed. Why is my big question on that one.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I mean, generally, our team culture for the SDK is to seal classes if we don't have a clear extensibility requirement, and so sometimes that can be a little unclear when we're kind of laying down. So basically, we tend to seal, if you look at the core semantic kernel, there's a lot of sealed implementation. So your feedback is critical for us to understand that there is an extensibility pattern here. And we can certainly explore unsealing the strategies. I can create an issue for that too.
Yeah, so especially for those sorts of things where you probably would maybe want to take that base pattern, because it doesn't, because there's a lot of open things that you need to be able, you need to craft a big ass prompt to get it to work, right? So that's a good opportunity for extensibility in that particular instance. So
yes,
yeah,
yes.
Great. Thanks so much for the feedback, Gary. Really appreciate it. You coming to provide that. And then Chris will also follow up with you for some of the further questions that you had around the hackathon as well, as we'd love to get that implemented. So I really appreciate it. I did see we had a hand up from Vishag. Vishag, do you want to come off of mute? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. So I would like to ask one question related to the auto function calling feature. One of the use of auto function calling, or the way of tracking the function calling in our application is part of the tokenization, or the tokens what we are using for the prompts when we are sending the everything to the LLM. So if we are having a lot of plugins with lot of functions, and we are injecting that to the semantic kernel, and how the tokenization or the token calculation is happening, or from where we can track how much tokens it calculated or available used for the entire prompt.
That's a really good question, Sir. I'll hand it over to you.
So I don't have that answer to your question. So I know that like number of tokens is available via the metadata. So every time you send a request to AI via one of our AI connectors, you may have access various AI-related metadata via the metadata property on the response. I'm not aware, certainly not aware about the way how those tokens are calculated on the AI side. I don't know if anyone else having this knowledge from
yeah, it's been
our team.
It kind of depends on the model, right? Each model has slightly different. That's why there's tokenizers for different models. It sounds like, are you having a challenge of you're running out of tokens, or you don't have enough output tokens because you're passing in so many plugins with so many descriptions? Is that the...
So Ivan, yes, actually internally we are also a consumer saving the token consumption for the prompt response and those kind of things as part of the reporting purposes, right? So in that calculations, currently we are calculating the prompt, what we are sending, including the system message, everything. We are calculating the prompt tokens, but it's I'm not sure that that particular calculation is excluding the function called metadata.
Okay, yeah. So Tal might be able to. Yeah. So Tal actually, I'll put a link in the chat. I think it's in the chat too. But it's Tal just did a blog post yesterday, and I think you can get, Tal, do you get the full tokens with the function calling tokens also in there?
Yeah, well, we get whatever it's returned by the model, right? So I think my answer to the question is the same, Sergey. Like we're not sure how the model calculates the token, but yeah.
But we should be able to get the full token count back from the model. However, the model calculates its own usage, right? We'll get that back, and then you can actually store that in your own telemetry to know exactly which how much you're spending, and then ideally you can either charge back to the business unit or whatever you need to do on your side.
Okay, so is that mean currently as part of the telemetry, we can record that and we can get it from the telemetry reports. So instead of calculating it from the application. So currently we are using tick token library to calculate the number of tokens consumed by the prompt from an internal reporting point of view. not from telemetry point of view. Even telemetry is having that we enable the telemetry, but from a reporting point of view, we are internally calculating using tick token library, which is only prompt, including the chat history, system message, and the user prompt.
That's right. Yeah, with the new, it's not really updated. We did a bunch of documentation for you, so you can know how to do that. But exactly, it'll bring you the tokens back from the model versus the tokenizer trying to figure out what it thinks the number should be. So Tal, correct me if I'm wrong, that should bring back the actual full token count.
Yes, that's correct. Because the token count we report from within inside the telemetry data is actually returned by the model. So if we're doing check completion, it will be inside the response metadata.
Yeah, I saw that concept like usage or something, completion usage or something, and available if it is streaming is not enabled. If streaming is enabled, then that particular property is null from a semantic kernel point of view. So is that something we are enabling for streaming as well?
Yes, streaming, we're working on it because not all model providers provide token usage in their streaming APIs. Even OpenAI, they just enable that feature. So, and the way they do it is in the last chunk, and that chunk doesn't contain any data. So we need to figure out a way for us to actually from our AI connector, return that last chunk to the kernel functions and clients, etc. Right now, if a chunk doesn't contain anything, we skip the chunk. But then in the streaming APIs that an OpenAI streaming API, the last chunk is the usage, contains the usage information, and that's it, nothing else. And we're currently skipping that. So.
Okay.
Great, thanks for the question. I'm not seeing other questions in chat, but do other folks want to come off of mute with questions or items they're working through? We'd love to hear from you. I'll give it a minute more in case anyone's typing. But if there aren't any other questions, we can go and close office hours, but I'll give another minute. Oh, Gary, I see a point in chat. Would you want to come off of mute too? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. So when I was doing some things yesterday, because I'm creating I'm creating an abstract model to keep track of what agents and things I want and plugins I want to create, and I wanted to store the type. But when I went to go use add from type, you need to. It's more like a design time type. You need to put the actual T in, as opposed to normally what I see is you have that as an option, but you can also there have an overload that will take a type rather than having to, so that way it can be more dynamic, and that option wasn't there. So now I've had to create an instance. So now I'm taking my type, creating an instance, and then doing the from object to get around that. So it'd just be nice to be able to have that overload there to be able to pass in a type parameter. Does that make sense?
Let me ask you a question. So today there is a few methods that allows you to import your plugins into Semantic Kernel, right? And one of those is add from type, and it accepts the type as a generic.
Yes.
So you don't need to create an instance of a class.
No, but that's fine if I'm coding it, right? Yeah. But if I have the type that I want defined in a class somewhere else, right? And now I'm passing that into a routine to dynamically create my my types. yeah. So what Chris just put in the chat is what I'm looking for. Then I don't have that as an option, right? Because unless I'm hard coding it in, right, and I have my then I can't use that method. So I have the workaround is I've got my type, I create an instance of that type. Now I've got my instance, then I can use the create from object.
Yeah, I understood your question. That the reason just like I wanted to understand your scenario. So.
Yeah, so I've just got things defined elsewhere, and then I want to be able to pass that in to then dynamically create everything. Because there's a lot of boilerplate that has to go in when you create things that's all basically the same. So I'm defining this stuff a little bit more externally in a simplified fashion. And I take that simplified version and then create all the boilerplate with all the kernels, because kernel, I mean, like every method takes a kernel. Yeah, there's a lot of additional boilerplate that needs to go in. So I just try to simplify that. And if no one else has got any other questions, with regards to function calling, so not all LLMs support function calling. So do we have any existing strategies, or do we have any existing thinking on how we're going to be able to stimulate function calling for LLMs that don't? With the caveat being that obviously it won't necessarily work as well. It's a little bit similar to what we're doing with, I guess, the kernel function selection strategy, but for plugins. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, Ewan, do you have an answer for this?
I sure do. Yes. So you are spot on. Not all have the ability to plan. Although we are seeing more and more come out, and even small models come out with function calling kind of endpoints in the past. So Semantic Kernel has been around now for 18 or so months. At the beginning, we actually had to build this ourselves. So we have what's called planners. These are still out there. It's really ways to do this before function calling. So our planners have evolved into function calling, auto function calling. So I pasted a link in the chat. You can kind of see some details on the old versions of function calling. This would still be the way to go if you want to use a local model or small language model that does not have function calling. So you can use these same patterns to do that. So feel free to check that out.
Right. So just to follow up on that, then I haven't read your article yet, but is there a plan to consolidate that so we as a dev don't necessarily have to work quite so hard? And now again, I haven't seen what the implementation is. And the other question I got is all the docs explain about personas, plugins, and planners. Are planners, with now function calling, are planners effectively dead going forward?
Yes, because the models have evolved to do it way better than doing it through prompts.
Okay.
So that's the evolution.
Okay. So when are we looking to update that? Because what's confusing to me, again, is that you read all the docs on the website or getting started, all the concepts, okay, there's these three things, planners and stuff. Now we start looking at the chats and things. Where's the planners gone?
Yep. So give us about another week and a half, and you should see a new updated Learn sites with all the new functionality. We're waiting on getting some of the new pieces out.
Okay.
So yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Great. Thanks.
Perfect. And with that, we're at time, Gary. Really appreciate the feedback. Would love to hear about how all of your work with the hackathon goes. And as Evan mentioned, we're going through a lot of the doc updates. I know that we've been hearing feedback from community. Really appreciate you taking the time to give us that feedback, and we're listening and going through and evolving that as well. If you have any questions in the interim of our office hours, feel free to use GitHub discussions and we can triage it there. We go through and look at that on a daily basis. And just want to thank everyone for joining in, everyone from the Semantic Kernel team as well, presenting now. Thanks, everyone.